Definitely need some insight on what happened at the White House yesterday.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Timothy Edgar returns from the Watson Institute. He's just published a piece in a very high-profile law/security blog suggesting that maybe the general needs the help of the ACLU. We'll talk about that coming up here momentarily. Welcome in. It is great to have you aboard. We'll get to all that happened in the White House yesterday coming up, but some things are happening here in Rhode Island that we certainly need to pay attention to. So let's go down the rundown and check things out here. This was the front and center, the Rhode Island story of the day, no doubt. Take a look at this headline. At the top, Roberts, a casualty of the botched threat. That is Liz Roberts, the former Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of Health and Human Services. This is all about the HUHIP program. This is the massive technology, $364 million worth of federal and state taxpayer money designed to help you get food stamps better and get involved in the health exchange in an efficient manner. And it's everything in terms of state services to you on one platform. It was a big move. It was one fell swoop, and it didn't work. And the governor has been behind the 8 ball on this for 5 months. Most people on the ground knew that there were problems. Most people from a bottom-up organizational point of view within state government knew that this thing was a disaster. And it took until last month for her to finally say, all right, uncle, this thing is terrible. She blew out some folks, namely the one of the key people, Melba DePina, and the technology director were let go. Liz Roberts suffered her demise, having to resign. In fact, I know, Kev, this is a little out of order, but we have a picture of Liz Roberts, don't we? We could probably fire that up. There she is. Liz is commonly known to Rhode Islanders and a good egg, but certainly not a technology expert. And this thing is, well, in her mind, in need of fresh eyes. The governor, at a press conference that I attended this morning at the Department of Administration, just flat out apologized.
To all of the employees at DHS who have been struggling with this new system, and to all of the Rhode Islanders who have been struggling with the system and endured hardships because the system hasn't worked, I apologize. I apologize. I want you to know we're going to get this right.
The governor explains this. She accepts that it's a leadership problem. She accepts that all the way down the line, there should have been better recognition of the realities on the ground. But for the most part, through the work of Eric Bean, her chief operating officer, who's now really project managing the entire recovery and who penned off quite the thick report to the governor and was released today to the press about all of this, she says it's one kind of problem, really.
Vendor Deloitte produced for us a defective system. The system they gave us was defective, Eric would say broken, and didn't work. We didn't get what we paid for. We paid them a lot of money. We didn't get what we paid for. And they represented to us that it was in much better shape than in fact it was.
In essence, she's saying it's a technology problem. Less a leadership problem and more a technology problem, which is understandable. She took a lot of heat in this press conference today for who needs to take the fall for this, but she's already had 3 top executives take the fall, and now she's done some shuffling of the deck and threatens to sue Deloitte if Deloitte doesn't fix this problem. I asked her about the nuances and the symbiotic relationship that's necessary when you've got a $364 million commitment to a vendor that you're going to sue for not getting the job done right. She admitted that's complicated. I asked her, why is Deloitte not here? If Deloitte is partnering up and recognizing all these problems, why hasn't it shown up here at this press conference today? She looked at me in a puzzled way and said, you know what? Maybe they should be here. Maybe they will be here. So this is an ongoing conversation. And she projects it'll take at least a year to fix. All right. We'll get into that. I promise you we'll have many programs on this as we go forward. In the meantime, under the radar, sort of, headline here, the Rhode Island Republican Party head has levied this complaint against the Speaker of the House. You know Brandon Bell. He is the chairman of the Republican Party and does a pretty good job in rebel rousing, no doubt about it. Of course, you know the Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello. He is, you know, probably the most powerful person in Rhode Island by charter, at least. He put out a statement in regard to this complaint saying, you know, hey, listen, if we messed up on anything, we'll try to fix it. I think we have a statement there. But for the most part, this is about PAC money, Political Action Committee money, that Brandon Bell says was misspent or overspent for the support of Democratic candidates. The speaker is more or less saying, well, if we got a paperwork problem, I'll let you know. Bell would say it's much more than a paperwork problem. We'll get Brandon Bell in here to line up his complaint for us sooner than later, I hope. The problem with the complaint is there's no specifics about the allegations. So until such time as we get some specifics, we'll have to see what the Board of Elections is going to do with that. In the meantime, so those are the two stories that really were getting everybody's attention in Rhode Island today, but still, there's no doubt that what's happening in Washington is almost dwarfing all of it. Here is the headline that started all of this in the Washington Post. Justice Department warned White House that Flynn could be vulnerable to Russian blackmail. This is yesterday's, actually 2 days ago, online at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, the story that really started this ball rolling. At 4 o'clock, Flynn had the complete trust of the president. By 5, after that story rolled, he was out the door. More headlines, just kind of reflecting on the nature of this and all the different aspects. It's clear that the White House, if not Donald Trump, knew that this whole thing was ongoing for a couple-week period of time. And, you know, obviously the vice president did not know about this when he went on Face the Nation on January 15th and suggested that General Flynn had never talked to the Russians about sanctions. We really have to reposition the entire thing, and Timothy Edgar can certainly do that. How are you, my friend? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You put out an interesting piece that we have to talk about in our next segment, because I don't think it puzzles me, but it certainly is a major aspect of the story. Let me see if I can just position this in 30 seconds time. You know, we had we had campaign intervention from the Russians. I think everyone's established that that happened. President Obama in late December took sanctions against Russia, you know, threw out 30 folks and penalized some near 10 or 12 people in Russia financially. The slap on the wrist, the fight back. Interestingly enough, Russia didn't say much about it, which piqued the FBI's curiosity, and they began to hone in on the ambassador, I guess, a little bit more tightly, and intercepted some phone calls, one of which is General Flynn, who was appointed the National Security Advisor, does not need Senate approval, so he was up and running and doing his transitional work, networking, all that kind of stuff, and seemingly proffered something about the sanctions to the Russian ambassador, that which we do not know what he said yet.
We don't know exactly what he said. We do know that he misled Vice President-elect Pence and others in the White House about the fact that this topic came up at all.
So the story goes.
Right. Well, this is pretty, I mean, this was in Flynn's resignation letter. He said it was an inadvertent mistake, but essentially the topic clearly came up. The signal that Flynn apparently sent...
With the ambassador.
With the ambassador, and when Flynn was talking with the Russian ambassador, apparently Flynn sent a signal, hey guys, don't worry, we're going to have a softer line on these issues, so maybe you shouldn't retaliate, at least that's the suggestion. And in any event, the Russians didn't retaliate against those sanctions. So when he was asked about it, he said, I don't recall having that conversation. This led to the crisis that led to his resignation yesterday.
All right. Well, you're reporting it out exactly the way the story is reporting out. I have questions about the reporting out of the story. So what happens is that on January 15th, Mike Pence does Face the Nation on CBS, is asked about it because there's rumblings about, you know, communication with the Russians, and he says, hey, listen, the conversations were limited to logistics and nothing about that. Come January 21st through the 26th, the FBI says, come on in to the general. They talk to him for about a week, and at the end of that, the then acting attorney general advises the White House counsel that he may be in a vulnerable position and be subject to even perhaps blackmail. So that happened on January 26th, and so for an 18-day period of time, all the way up until Monday, there was this non-issue for the White House until the Washington Post reported out that story, and then in an hour's time, he's gone.
That's right, and this is somewhat troubling, actually, because the information that the president and the White House counsel and others had about Flynn, they had that for weeks ahead of time, and they didn't take any action on it. And presumably, President Trump had decided you know, I think I'm okay with what Flynn has told me. But then when there are leaks and there's a new attention to it from the news media, they change their mind and they make the decision to get rid of him. And so it seems pretty clear from the timeline, at least this is my view, is that it was the leaks and the renewed attention to these problems that Flynn was having, rather than the fact that Flynn had lost the trust of the president and the team, which is the official story. The official story is, well, he wasn't forthcoming to the vice president-elect, and that's why we had to get rid of him. But they already knew that. They had known that for a while. The reason that they got rid of him is only after this became a big story in the Washington Post and then the rest of the media. Which
is, in a lot of ways, not making a lot of sense or giving a lot of comfort to even Republicans, never mind all those Trump voters out there. We'll reposition this and talk about Professor Edgar's point of view here on how the general might have been wronged and, you know, what might be the truth and how do we actually find it. Stay with us. All right, we record this program in the early afternoon. This is the latest what we had on the General Flynn situation.
President Trump unleashed a tweet storm Wednesday morning, pushing back against a New York Times report that some of his staff and other associates had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence during the 2016 campaign. He wrote, "The real scandal here is that classified information is illegally given out by intelligence like candy. Very un-American." The FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies are looking at whether people close to the president were coordinating with Russian officials last year. The FBI also questioned former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn about his pre-inauguration phone call with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. that led to Flynn's resignation Monday night.
The level of trust between the president and General Flynn had eroded to the point where he felt he had to make a change.
Congress is already investigating Russia's influence on the U.S. election, and now lawmakers are debating whether they should dig into Flynn's departure and new allegations about the administration's ties with Moscow.
The recent reports of potential high-level contact between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence, including General Flynn, should raise hairs on the necks of everyone in this body.
Senate Democrats are holding an emergency meeting to figure out their next move. Some of the Republican callings, including Senator John McCain, say this administration's foreign policy will need more congressional scrutiny.
Hey, so much there. So the New York Times is reporting that this relationship between the campaign and the Russians existed, that he fights back. The president fights back on the intel leaks is part and parcel your point.
Yeah.
And I want to get to that because you've written an interesting piece on that. So let's get to that, and then I'll ask you the follow-up. So you wrote that Flynn should call the American Civil Liberties Union.
That's exactly right. I mean, leaks of surveillance materials are an abuse of civil liberties. Those surveillance materials are under a court order. The court order says this is how you should handle the information. Certainly doesn't say you're allowed to leak it to the press, says you can handle it through intelligence channels.
An ongoing court order.
That's right, a court order of surveillance.
A blanket one.
And
right?
Those are designed to protect our Fourth Amendment rights. And so when you leak that kind of information, you're essentially abusing the civil liberties of U.S. persons, of Americans that may be involved in those conversations. That's the whole debate we've had about the NSA. We might be talking to people that are being monitored by the government, but we have rules to protect privacy. Those rules were violated in these leaks. And so I think it's very ironic because Michael Flynn has made alarming statements that might make you think he was going to be involved in questionable activities by the Trump administration, but he may be the first victim of a surveillance abuse in this administration. Not in the surveillance itself, which was obviously authorized, and not even in the fact that his participation was recorded because that's allowed, but in the leaking.
The court order is a blanket one for all ongoing work that way, or is that specific to this intercept or these series of ambassador phone tappings?
So, when you want to authorize surveillance of somebody inside the United States, even an ambassador, you need a specific court order for that. But there are standard procedures for minimization that have been declassified and released. I talk about them in my piece, and it's not a surprise that they don't include the press as one of the recipients of those surveillance transcripts.
Here's the thing. Donald Trump would love your point of view. But Donald Trump doesn't have to be tweeting about it. And Donald Trump doesn't need, at this point, to exacerbate what is clearly a problem between the White House and the intel community here.
Absolutely, and in fact, I think it's crocodile tears from the president. If he thinks that Michael Flynn was ill-used, why did he accept his resignation? He could have kept him on. And in fact, it looks like that's what he was doing until the leaks happened. So I find that kind of complaining about the leaks from the most powerful person in our government, the president, to be just odd when, again, if he was objecting to the sort of trial by leak of his national security advisor, fine, keep him on and stand by him. I think that may be trying to distract from the chaos in the White House. I do think that it's an important point, and although it kind of pains me to admit it, I think he has a point on that.
Mike Pence, if you believe the story, I'm not yet ready to believe the story. I know that there's a resignation letter that suggested that, hey, I messed up, I didn't inform the VP, he went on TV, I'm so embarrassed, da-da-da, da-da-da. If Mike Pence this early is out of the loop, that is a significant problem, I think, for America, because I think a lot of people voted for Donald Trump with a feeling that, hey, listen, at least this guy Mike Pence is hanging around and seems to be a real partner, a la Biden to Obama. We know the vice presidents sometimes are put out on the pasture pretty quickly. So that's problematic. Maybe he has enough juice to make it a problem for Donald Trump. But clearly, if the White House counsel received that information 18 days prior, he did not give it to the president.
Certainly not, and in fact, that's the real, the person who should be answering a lot of questions right now is the White House counsel. The White House seems to be in complete disarray right now. They received very important information about, this intelligence intercept involving the national security advisor, the incoming national security advisor and the Russian ambassador, and where was the teamwork involved in figuring out what to do about it? It seems like the vice president thought one thing, the White House counsel had other information. What did Donald Trump know? Were these calls authorized? Was Michael Flynn speaking on behalf of the president-elect or not? There are a ton of questions we don't know the answers to, and we should know the answers to.
They were obviously relying on the notion that this is internal turbulence that will never get out. Because, Pence seems to have a cool head all the time. But probably when the Post story came out, he must have picked up the horn and said, Mr. President, he's got to go because I look like an idiot.
You would certainly think so. But again, I mean, the White House counsel already had this information when Pence went out and engaged in that, in those misstatements, apparently. So
well, no, he didn't. Pence was on TV on the 15th. On the 26th of January is when the counsel got the information from the acting attorney general.
Right. So my point is that they knew about it before, long before now.
Yes. Though that the clock started on January 26th, right, when the counsel received this information. When we come back, we'll talk about the likelihood that Donald Trump didn't know what Michael Flynn was saying to the Russian ambassador about sanctions. I mean, who believes that? Stay with us. Alrighty, the Central Intelligence Agency, who knows? Who knows? That guy. He's in the middle of this whole thing. But what's interesting is that if you go back to the chronology of events, the President Obama issues these sanctions. It is absolutely the expected reaction from Russia to do something or say something.
Right. They
say nothing. Donald Trump tweets out congratulations to Putin for kind of keeping his powder dry. Mm-hmm. There's nobody in this country who's thinking through this thing who doesn't believe, I would think, that Donald Trump either authorized or understood that Michael Flynn had full authority to relax the Russians on the sanctions.
Certainly. I mean, Flynn is not saying anything that should be surprising to anybody who is following the campaign. Right. We know that Donald Trump is, wants a more positive relationship with Russia. This was, arguably, it's a breach of protocol. It is a breach of protocol for the incoming administration to really have any substantive talks with the foreign government. So that was certainly a breach of protocol. There's also this very, very old law.
The Logan Act, right?
The Logan Act, which has never been really used, and part of the reason it hasn't is it's very vague, and it says you can't engage in diplomacy kind of on your own. There are First Amendment problems with that. So it was not the right thing to do. It was an error in judgment, certainly, but it doesn't seem like he was off on his own saying something crazy. He was delivering a message that's very much in line with what one would have expected President-elect Trump would have wanted the Russians to hear. And as you point out, the tweet, kind of reinforced that.
So where does this leave us? The New York Times is suggesting that there's ongoing discussions with Russia from the campaign perspective. The problem in history usually is not the act, it's the cover-up of the act, and then the tripping over oneself as you continue to double down on stories that may not be true. Republicans are going to be forced to acquiesce to some kind of commission hearings of some kind. Where do you think this is going to go?
Look, I think the obvious thing for the administration and for the Congress to do is to take this seriously, to actually look through and review what these contacts were, what were the Russians up to in 2016, what should we be doing, and to resist those kinds of inquiries is only going to make the problem worse and make it last longer. So I think there's a bit of denial right now on the part of the Republicans that they can sort of put their heads down and hope that this all goes away with Flynn's resignation. I think that is absolutely the wrong way to go. They should be focused on figuring out exactly what happened and taking right action.
Put more pressure on the president to release financials, to be more transparent about business relationships with Russia. I think that's the big picture here. And I think right now between the intel community and the press, they're like dogs seeing blood.
Absolutely. And one reason that you end up with leaks, as much as I think they're a bad thing and even an abuse of constitutional rights when you're talking about surveillance, they happen because there's a lack of trust in the people that are working for you. And what you want to do is engender more trust. Whenever we've had leaks in the past, cracking down on them, trying to prosecute them, that always backfires. What you want to do is you want to bring people together and make them feel like they're part of a common enterprise, that their concerns are actually being heard. You had people raising very important and serious concerns about Flynn up to the highest levels of the White House, and nothing happens. And that in turn provokes these leaks as a response. If people felt like these things were being taken seriously, you would see less of this reaction of going to the press with leaking classified information, which can be bad for constitutional rights in the case of surveillance, but also very bad for our security.
We got a few seconds here. This one's not going away, is it?
Absolutely not. No, and I think we'll want to hear a lot more from Michael Flynn in the next few days about his perspective of what happened.
I wonder if he'll say anything. Well, he might be subpoenaed.
I think he may have to.
Thanks for your intel on this. Where do people read your thing? It's on
the Lawfare blog. So
we'll link that on foxprovidence.com and we'll tweet it out so you can read Timothy's writings on this. Thank you, my friend.
Okay, thank you.
Final word and we come back. So tomorrow on this program, we'll hear from a local journalist who thinks that this is all an embarrassment for the state of Rhode Island. So we've got General Flynn, who is a native Rhode Islander. Sean Spicer, the press secretary, is a Barrington guy. I'm not ready to do that, but I think our guest is, and we'll take his notes coming up on tomorrow night's program. All right, we are preempted at 7:30, by the way. We'll see you at midnight tomorrow night, and see you on the radio at 3 on WPRL. Thanks for watching. Good night.